Welcome to Scary Time by Indie Drop-In Network. Each week we feature an episode from the best independent creators. Subscribe for great scary content. If you would like to help support indie creators, check out our Patreon at the bottom of the show notes. Today's episode is from Curly Conspiracies. Don't forget to check out the show notes for links to subscribe and follow on social media. Enjoy the show.
Begin.
Hi everyone, this is Curly Conspiracies. I'm your host for this week, Holly Lauerman, and I'm here with Brooke Sasser.
Hi guys.
In order to fly a plane, there are a lot of procedures and rules that need to be completed before takeoff. The pilot and the crew have a routine they have to follow, and a checklist, such as making sure doors and windows are sealed, making sure the auxiliary fuel pump is turned off, the altimeter is set, and the camera transponder is turned on, just to name a few. Flights follow the same route time and time again, especially cargo planes. It could even get monotonous. So when Japan Airlines Flight 1628 called air traffic control to report that they were seeing two unidentified aircraft in the sky, this was alarming. Furthermore, the Regional Operations Command Center picked something up on their radar scopes in that same area where the flight crew reported the sighting. The thing is there were not any military or civilian planes working in that area during that time. So, what were they? So let's put on our tinfoil hats and let's see how this conspiracy takes off. On November 17, 1986, Japan Airlines Flight 1628 was on a 4-part journey. The Boeing 747 was en route from Paris onto Keflavik, Iceland, and then on to Anchorage, Alaska, and then would end in Tokyo at Narita Airport. The flight had an experienced crew: Second Officer Tsukuda, First Officer Terufuji, and Captain Kinju Terachi, who was in charge of the flight. Captain Kinju Terachi was a senior pilot that had flown over 10,000 miles in his 29 years and even used to be a military fighter pilot. So everything was going as usual. They had just made it over the Alaskan-Canadian border, which was on their way to the third part of their voyage. This route was nothing out of the ordinary for the crew, and everything was smooth sailing so far. The moon was directly behind them, and the sky was dark, besides the little bit of sunlight left after the sun had set. As they were getting closer to approaching their third destination, the crew started seeing something. They couldn't make out what it was because it was pretty far ahead of them. Once the plane moved a little closer, they saw that there were lights: yellow, amber, and green. They just assumed maybe it was just a military plane, so not thinking much of it, they continued on. These lights remained in front of them for about 10 minutes, which was strange. Most of the time, military planes would be in and out of their sight quickly, or at least change direction. They turned off the lights of the cockpit to see the lights clearer. This would also remove any reflection of the lights on their window. Whatever it was making these lights, though, it was flying at the same pace as them. This made them feel uneasy, and that was when they called air traffic control in Anchorage. Luckily, we know exactly what was said because the transcripts were released by the FAA, also known as the Federal Aviation Administration. Before I go into the transcripts, I do want to say that there is definitely a lot of flight lingo, and the flight and the tower switched back and forth between different stations. So I'm going to just go ahead and sum it up for you. Captain Terauchi calls Anchorage ARTCC Combined Sector of Air Traffic Control and asks, Quote, Anchorage Center, Japan Air 1628. Do you have any traffic at 7 o'clock above? To which they reply, heavy negative. So meaning there was nothing there. Now, there is something to keep in mind. They say they see traffic at 7 o'clock, which they use the face of a clock to tell directions. But notice that they said traffic was in front of them instead of behind them. This is something that has been noted by several people, but something else to keep in mind is that English was their second language, and throughout the transcripts, it seems that there are a couple of errors here and there. Most believe it could have been an error in translation. Later on in the transcripts, they go back and do say it was the 10 o'clock position, which is how they described it earlier, in front of them and to the left. Air traffic control didn't see anything, but they asked if they could identify the aircraft. The problem was Captain Terauchi and his crew couldn't make out exactly what it was. It was still too far ahead of them. The static between air traffic control and the plane muddied the audio. The crew noted that the static became worse than usual in their VHF receiver once they were close to the lights. And even after the incident, there was even an inspection of the vehicle, and the VHF receiver was in working order. So the static couldn't have been caused by a malfunction.
That's so creepy.
Yes, so it was getting worse when they were getting closer to the lights. So the lights probably were causing the static. And just like that, the lights disappeared, just as they had appeared. They told air traffic control that the target was extinguished, and they carried on with their expected flight plan. Then out of the blue, the lights that they saw before came back. But instead of being farther out, they popped up directly in front of the plane as it was going 600 miles an hour. They immediately called air traffic control again. The stations asked them the location of the aircraft and what the lights looked like. The crew finally got a better look because the lights were shining directly into the cockpit. The captain even said that the lights felt warm against his face. His co-pilot recounted that the lights were amber, green, yellow, and that there was a white light that kind of looked similar to a landing light. Now, green, red, and white lights are pretty common for aircraft to use, but yellow and amber are not conventional colors, which strikes as odd to the crew. The green light that they saw was blinking kind of almost like Christmas lights because the glow from the lights would grow stronger and weaker. In addition, the lights made a swinging motion and kept the same pace as them. Once these lights started moving in different formations, they realized that there were two objects, not one. The two objects were rectangular figures that had rows of lights going across them. These lights projected the different colors reported. It almost seemed like these two objects were surrounding the plane with their lights. The two pilots surprisingly never felt afraid, though. They were more so shocked about what they were actually seeing. Air traffic control continued to ask questions about their location, what the object looked like, and more. The officers at the stations also asked questions about the flight conditions, the locations of the clouds, and what the clouds look like. When I first read over the FAA documents, I found this strange because why would they be asking questions about the clouds and how the weather is? So from what I found out, they were trying to see if the lights they were seeing were actually their own plane's lights illuminating and reflecting off of the clouds to make it seem like another object was creating them. There were a few clouds in the sky that night, but they were thin and below them instead of in front of them. So when they saw these lights, it was in an area void of clouds, so it couldn't have been their own lights. Then the objects shining the lights started moving away, behind the plane. Once the objects had disappeared, a pale white light illuminated something that they could have never imagined. Before we discover what they saw, we will take a commercial break. Now let's get back to what the pilot discovered once the object started moving away from the jet. The pale white light illuminated a large type of aircraft that they hadn't seen before. It was another one. The pilot could see the silhouette of what looked like the shape of a walnut, but the size was as large as an aircraft carrier. And if you're like me and don't know how large an aircraft carrier is, well, it's about the length of 3 football fields. But imagine a walnut-shaped aircraft as large as 3 football fields in the sky.
Please tell me that when he saw this walnut-shaped aircraft that he went back to air traffic control and was like, listen, listen to me. There's something crazy going on. I can't even imagine, like, what do you do in that scenario?
And when I read interviews like after the incident and when he's like talking through this incident, he calls this walnut-shaped aircraft the mothership. Like, he automatically knows there's no way that this is just some type of aircraft that is from the Earth. Like, he just automatically says it's the mothership. Like, there's no doubt about it in his mind that he knows that this is not from Earth.
That is so spooky.
It is really creepy. And then he looked at his weather radar, and sure enough, the object that he just saw showed up on the radar. Except he saw a green circle, but normally other planes would show up as a red circle.
So what does that mean?
And that's the thing, he doesn't know. He doesn't know what that means. That's never been in like how to be a pilot like training. He's never seen this before, never heard of anything showing up as a green circle on the weather radar. So immediately he calls the air traffic control station again to check if they saw anything on their radar. But the thing is, they still didn't see anything on their radar. The crew members were definitely becoming worried, now wondering what are the intentions of this UFO. The mysterious aircraft seemed to be gaining on them, and that is when they decided to ask to deviate from the course. They asked for permission to take a left turn and then descend. The officers agreed. They took a left turn and descended to only have the UFO hold its position behind them, meaning this UFO was following them. Air traffic control decided to get the Japan Airlines flight to make a 360 turn to see would the object actually follow them in a complete circle, or would it just continue on its set path and maybe just go ahead of them. As they were turning, the Regional Operations Command Center finally found the target on their radar in the same position that was seen on the pilot's weather radar. The Regional Operations Command Center and the Anchorage Air Traffic Control immediately investigated to find if there were any military or civilian planes flying in the area. Both control centers were in agreement that there were no military planes or civilian planes flying in that location. Once the 360 turn was completed, the pilot finally believed that this mysterious UFO had disappeared. Or so they thought, because just a minute later, the UFO showed right back up, and it was still behind them. Air traffic control asked the pilot if he wanted a military plane nearby to come check up on them. They refused the offer. And I know, I see your face right now, like, what? Why would they do that? I thought the same thing. I was like, military plane to come help me out because there's some strange like alien aircraft possibly, following me. But here's the thing. In interviews after the UFO sightings, the pilot recalled an event that happened when he was younger about a military plane checking on a UFO, and it ended up disastrous. So I'm going to tell you about this story that he heard when he was younger, and it'll kind of help you see why he actually refused for the military plane to come check up on him. So according to the book, The Government UFO Files, The Conspiracy of Cover-Up, the story the pilot remembered started off with a sighting of a UFO near the Godman area airfield in Kentucky. So Captain Thomas Mantle and 2 other fighter jets went to go check it out. As they were reaching higher altitudes, one of the pilots started feeling dizzy. The equipment that they had wasn't serviced in over a year, and this was definitely needed since they were getting close to 22,000 feet at the time. As they were climbing, Captain Thomas Mantle lost contact with the other 2 airmen. He made sure to tell them before losing them that he was going to go to 25,000 feet for only about 10 minutes or so to see if he could find this unidentified aircraft, and he would come right back. Unfortunately, Captain Thomas Mantle never came back. It is unclear exactly what happened, but we do know that he did die from oxygen starvation. We don't know exactly what the UFO was or if it even had any effect on the aircraft or the captain. Most believe it was a classified research balloon, but others believe it might have been something more inexplicable, like a possible alien.
Now extended through January 14th, join a clean and spacious Planet Fitness for zero enrollment and only $10 a month. With tons of equipment and free fitness training, it's the perfect place for everybody to work out.
Even me, mister, I'm so stressed I grind my teeth more than most people grind coffee.
Especially you. Give your anxiety-clenched jaw a rest.
My molars will be so happy.
Start feeling fit-tacular today. Join in club or at planetfitness.com. Zero enrollment, $10 a month, cancel anytime. Deal ends January 14th. See club for details.
Encounter. But due to lack of evidence of either one of those theories, no one knows for sure. And that is the story that Captain Tarauchi heard when he was younger in the year 1948. Himself being a former fighter jet pilot, he didn't want another tragic accident to occur with this UFO, so he refused the offer of a military plane to check out the situation.
Wow, that must have been so scary for him to hear as he was younger and becoming a young pilot and thinking about that. I don't know. I feel like I still would have wanted help though, just knowing me. But thinking that this big UFO behind me was going to suck me up in their little walnut spaceship. But I don't know. That's so scary. Oh, I can't even imagine being in his situation and trying to make that decision.
Yeah, and I don't really know what the other crew members thought either, because I'm sure they were probably no, let's get this military airplane in here. What are you talking about? What are you doing? You're just going to sacrifice us to this UFO thing. I don't know. I'm kind of on the fence. I get the story and that's scary and he doesn't want that to happen to anybody else. But at the same time, I feel like I would want to be thinking about my crew members. And this story was a while back ago. And if the cause was oxygen starvation, I feel like the technology would have advanced more, that they would have not probably had this problem again with oxygen starvation, trying to go up to higher flights. I feel like they would have learned from that lesson and then it wouldn't have happened as much anymore, or at least hopefully at all anymore. So I don't know. I'm kind of with you on that one. I feel like I still would have wanted some help. And they do accept some help, just not from a military plane. So air traffic control offered another plane to have a United Airlines flight to come check. This flight was even closer to them than the military jet. The crew members accepted the help. He thought it would be different than a military plane because if this UFO was familiar with aircraft at all, they might assume that the military plane was an attack and there could be another tragic accident. If they used another cargo plane, it would look a little more inconspicuous and not like an attack because it was just another cargo plane. The United Airlines plane agreed to fly over to make sure everything was fine. But by the time this plane arrived, the Japan Airlines crew radioed back that the target was extinguished. The mysterious aircraft was no longer to be seen. So, unfortunately, there are no photographs taken of the UFOs, the lights, or the radar. The captain actually had a camera with him and decided to try to take a photograph of the lights and the object so that it could be identified later upon arrival in Anchorage. But of course, the autofocus wasn't focusing on it, and once it finally did focus, he couldn't get the shutter to work. As he was trying to get the camera to work, the plane began to go through turbulence. So he made sure to just closely pay attention to all of the details with the lights and the UFOs. And once he arrived in Anchorage, he drew sketches of everything he saw, from the lights to the radar screen in the cockpit to the mothership, or so he calls it. So I'm going to show you these sketches. These sketches will be on our website, curlyconspiracies.com, and our social media accounts. Brooke, I want you to tell me what you think of the sketches.
So I'm looking at 3 parts of this sketch that he drew, and the first one is showing the plane in comparison to the rectangular shaped UFOs that he originally saw with all those lights, and it definitely looks different, I think, than what I was imagining. It's showing lots of small circles, almost like these little bubbles, which I'm assuming are the lights. So very interesting. And then the second one is kind of exactly what I imagined. It looks just like a walnut. I don't know how else he would have described it. Perfect description, Captain. And the third one is the radar, and I am not a pilot in any way, but I see the little dot that he is showing as the aircraft or the UFO coming onto the screen. But I definitely think especially the top part is really interesting to me because it was totally different than what I had originally imagined.
And when I think of UFOs, I don't think of something rectangular with a lot of lights on it. It almost looks like some type of satellite with light bulbs on it. Or if you think of like a solar panel with just a ton of light bulbs on it. And it's really hard to describe it. And seeing the picture, it helps. But even seeing the picture, trying to describe it without seeing this visual is just very difficult. And it's not something that I've ever seen in any movies or reports or anything like that. When I think of aliens, I don't think of this. Or when I think of UFOs, I don't think of something like this. But I definitely think of the walnut-shaped mothership that he talks about is right on point. Just like you said, I feel like there's no other way to describe it. And that's what I think of when I think of UFOs. And then I feel like the dot on the radar screen is actually kind of large compared to the actual screen. So, I mean, again, I'm not a pilot, so I can't read any of this. And it's all in Japanese anyway, so I can't read that either. So, but it does look kind of big compared to the screen, I would feel like. So as soon as they landed, the Japan Airlines Flight 1628 crew and the air traffic control stations had their initial interviews with the FAA about the incident. The crew members told their stories, gave up their documents, and left. According to the officers at the air traffic control stations, it seemed like the FAA was only interested in the fact the aircraft didn't ask for permission to enter that area of space, rather than wondering what the UFO actually was. Oddly, it didn't seem as formal or seem like a big deal to them to hear this kind of story. Everything after that went back to normal, at least for a little while. I will say this is the place where the story gets a little muddy, because a couple of weeks later, after the UFO sighting, the media got wind of the story and it blew up across Japan and then into Alaska. The media was spreading information that wasn't verified, so some of the facts were misconstrued early on. Air traffic control stations in Anchorage were then being bombarded with questions by the media, trying to get the full coverage of the story. The control stations didn't even have all of the documents because they gave some of them up to the FAA when they originally investigated, so they decided to reach out to see if they could get a copy. According to the Anchorage Press, Lawrence Weiss wrote that John Callahan, who was the FAA Division Chief of the Accidents and Investigations Branch in Washington, D.C., he got a call from someone who worked at one of the air traffic control stations in Alaska. And, quote, he says, "We got a problem here. I don't know what to tell the media. The whole FAA office is full of the media from Alaska." Callahan asked, "What's the problem?" He says, "It's that UFO." I said, "What UFO?" He says, "Well, last week we had a UFO chase a 747 across the skies up here for about 30 minutes or so." I told him to get all the data together. I wanted all the civilian and military discs that they had and all the tapes that they had available and flown overnight to the tech center where I'm sitting. The military refused to send their tapes, but he got everything Anchorage Traffic Control had, end quote. So the media frenzy actually incited the FAA to further their investigation. And I'll admit, I'm pretty surprised to find out that the FAA didn't really want to know what the UFO truly was. They were just more concerned with someone breaking the law or intruding on their airspace. And I thought it would have been more crucial to know what the UFO actually was rather than it broke our laws. Unless this is something that has happened before and it's very common for the FAA to run into. Anyways, so the FAA finally started conducting interviews, recreating the data that the military didn't want to give up, and gathering more documents and collecting radar records 6 weeks after the incident. I am mentioning this because some people start picking this UFO encounter apart for a couple of reasons. One reason is because when looking at the first and second interviews of the crew members, some of the information is a little different between them. It could be because of memory from the event just happening and then again over a month later. Another reason is because the pilot had more to say than the other two crew members. The other crew members had trouble seeing the UFO and only saw the different colored lights. In addition, the pilot spoke better English than the other two members of the crew, and he got a better view of the UFO because it was on the left side of the plane rather than the right or the back of the plane. Because so many people were skeptical of Captain Terauchi, he soon lost his job flying planes for Japan Airlines after this event.
That's terrible.
I know. Once the media took a hold of the story, people didn't want a pilot that would quote unquote hallucinate or see things that weren't there. He was assigned a desk job. It didn't last forever, thankfully, and he was able to fly again, but only after several years after everything died down. Which is like awful to think about that, he comes across this UFO and this is not his fault. He wanted to report it and then all of a sudden the media got a hold of it and then he just lost his job. Because he didn't lose his job immediately after reporting it. So it had to be probably something with the media, like bringing it out to everybody, and then all the people know about it and people are worried, and there's different views on UFOs in America than in Japan too. So there's just a lot of things going on, but it's sad to see that he ended up like with a desk job, even though he was a very experienced pilot. I mean, over 29 years. And while I was researching, I didn't see any prior incidents that would have gotten him in trouble before this. So to think of this being the end-all be-all of him with his flying career, it's awful. So I know that was a lot of information, but now let's dig into what was this UFO? Well, there are a few theories to explore and possibly explain the mystery behind this story. The first theory is that all of this can be explained away because the UFOs and the lights were actually just planets. Jupiter was supposedly very bright, and Mars was seen pretty clearly the night of the incident. The pilot also never reported seeing the two planets while he was describing what was around them at the time of the sighting. So they think the lights that they saw had to be the planets. Or another thing that has been looked into was what if the lights were actually from turbulent ice crystals? The moonlight could reflect off of the ice crystals, which would cause the lights to appear and disappear like the crew members started seeing. The members also mentioned that they did see thin clouds which would generate these ice crystals. Maybe the pilot also mistook a spaceship for the planet Jupiter, and you can especially see this when looking at the shape that he drew, which looked like a walnut with the middle almost looking like a ring. Maybe that was a cloud. Well, there are a couple things with this theory that don't add up though. The object showed up on the pilot's weather radar and it was shown on the ground radar, which planets never do. The positions of the planets would have not aligned with where they saw the lights and the objects either. I also feel like if the image were a planet, it would resemble more of Saturn with a ring around it because by the sketches that he drew, it seemed like a walnut shape that would almost look like a ring around it, and it would look more like Saturn than Mars or Jupiter. An experienced pilot would be able to distinguish the difference between a UFO and a planet. The second theory is that the UFO was just a split image. The FAA was unable to fully confirm the event, but they believe it was a split image, meaning there was a malfunction in the radar system, causing it to look like there were two different aircraft in the sky in that area. So I looked up this malfunction, and it does happen, but it is pretty rare, and one of the air traffic controllers even said that it is so rare for a split image to happen on a radar screen in that area that they were flying in. Another issue is that this does not discredit the visual sightings that the crew members reported that night. They saw lights, and then the pilot saw the silhouette of a large aircraft that he called a spaceship. It also doesn't eliminate the blip on the weather radar either. The last theory we are going to explore is that what if it really was an inexplicable UFO sighting? Earlier I mentioned John Callahan, who was the FAA Division Chief of the Accidents and Investigations Branch in Washington, D.C. Well, he has been investigating this incident and believes that it was not just a split image. He believes that it was not a malfunction of the radar system, and instead it was a UFO encounter. The so-called split image was on the radar scope for over 30 minutes, which is a long time for a malfunction to be happening. He looked at controller scopes playback, documents, detailed records, and more. So one source, AnchoragePress.com, stated that Callahan actually got the three-way conversation that included the military. The military was tracking the UFOs. Yes, more than one. And there were details that the UFOs were traveling at thousands of miles per hour, moving in ways that no other aircraft could have done. And here is the most chilling part of all of this. So let's go back a little bit. Do you remember at the end of the encounter when the United Airlines plane came to check up on the Japan Airlines plane and the UFO disappeared before they showed up? Well, according to this new conversation with the military that Callahan discovered, the large UFO was actually still on their radar. And it was actually following the United Airlines plane in their blind spot.
No.
That is so unsettling, right? Oh, I just got chills. So Callahan showed his boss the evidence he had gathered, which he turned over to the head of the FAA, Donald Engen, which then set up a meeting with the FBI and the CIA to have a briefing about the whole event again. Callahan stated that, quote, when they got done, they actually swore all those other guys into, this never took place, we never had this meeting, and this was never recorded. This was one of the guys from the CIA. I asked them at the time, I don't know why you're saying this. I mean, if there was something there, and if it's not then in development, a stealth bomber, then you know it's a UFO. And if it's a UFO, why wouldn't you want the people to know? He said if they come out and told the American public that they ran into a UFO out there, it would cause panic across the country. So therefore, we can't talk about it. And we're taking all of this data. When they asked me what I thought, I told them that it looked like we had a UFO that was up there. As far as I was concerned, Reagan's science team were the ones that verified my own thoughts about it. They were very, very excited about the data. They had said that at this time, this was the only time that they had used the words a UFO was ever recorded on radar for any length of time, end quote. But fortunately, Callahan had copies of everything in his office.
So did Callahan get in trouble for sharing all of this?
I never did find out if he got in trouble for it, but I do know a lot of people try and discredit this story. So I don't know if, we do know that the FBI in the past has tried to discredit people. So I don't know if they're behind it or if this story actually didn't happen. It's really hard to tell because there's not any evidence of this happening besides him saying this. So there are, of course, problems with this theory as well. Besides the accounts of the crew members and the peculiar radar data, that is all the evidence they had. There were no photographs, the government never fully admitted to it being a UFO to the public, and the crew didn't tell the exact stories each time they were interviewed. They mixed up the colors of the lights and the positions from where the lights came from. Many people say that it could be because the time difference in the interviews or the language barrier, but it does still definitely present holes in this theory too. So we discussed how the unidentified object and lights could have been a mixture between planets and ice crystals. It could have been a split image, or maybe it really was a UFO. So now I want to know, Brooke, what are your thoughts?
So before I tell you all my thoughts, I have one burning question. So at the beginning, you mentioned that on the radar, the captain said that the radar had this green circle that came on, and it usually wasn't that color. It was usually red if another plane or another object came on. And I know you said that the pilot didn't understand why that would happen, but did anybody ever come back and explain what could have been green? Because I feel like whoever created the technology for this radar would be able to explain that, right?
So I was wondering that too, and I never found any information about that. I would love to know if anybody knows anything about like radars on or weather radars on planes. If a green dot comes up, what does that mean? And I'm sure technology has changed quite a bit since 1986, but if anybody was a pilot then and knows why a green dot would show up on weather radar, I would love to know, but it was never brought up later on, which is kind of surprising because I feel like that was a big piece of the evidence that he had that, hey, like, and he drew it out and everything of where it was and how big the circle was on the radar. I thought it would have been more prevalent later on within the investigation, but it actually never was. So I'm not really sure. Besides the fact of the location of the lights in the UFO, it never really explained why a green dot would be there, but I would love to know why.
Yes, very interesting. I would love to know that too. But I guess my thoughts are that, I don't know, the first theory with the planets, it just doesn't make sense. No reason why lights would be blinking or planets would be blinking like that or showing up on the radar, that it just doesn't make sense. And then as far as the splitting image malfunction, I don't think that really makes sense either, because I agree 30 minutes of a malfunction like that seems kind of long, whereas I feel like normally it probably wouldn't last for 30 minutes. So that one doesn't really make sense either. But as far as like a true UFO alien encounter something, I feel like that's what it has to be. And like you mentioned, there does seem to be some holes or some things that may be kind of sketchy about it. Like for instance, I mean, there's only 3 people on the plane, and I don't understand why they would make it up, and they do have radar to actually prove that there was something in the sky with them. So, I mean, a little odd that their stories are not matching, and it could be a language barrier. And I don't think they would make it up. I don't see why. There would be no end goal, I guess, especially because he lost his job over it. So it would have majorly backfired on him if it was some publicity stunt or something of the sorts. And then as far as Callahan's evidence goes, is when he got all that extra information at the end. I will say I want to believe him. The only part that I think is odd is that CIA and FBI meeting, just because I feel like there would have been some serious consequences for him to go out and leak all that info afterwards, if they truly said keep it quiet. But then again, you never know. I mean, there could really not be consequences for that. I've never had the CIA or FBI approach me telling me to be quiet, so maybe not. And I mean, like you said, people were trying to discredit him, and it has been proven that the FBI and CIA have done that to other public figures. So that could have been their attempt to, shut him down. So who knows? But I gotta say, I want to think that there was some aliens, I don't know, or some UFO something. And I feel like in the news, there's, especially recently, like this year, there has been so many news sources coming out, like in like official sources saying that there were true reports of UFOs. So I feel like this year, I don't know, after hearing this story, I'm like, yes, it probably was aliens.
This year definitely has had a lot of UFO sightings, and even the government coming out and being like, hey, we've seen this UFO, we've seen this UFO. I'm like, what? Like, you never admit to seeing UFOs, and now you are. What's happening here? I don't know. It's just so crazy that they're doing it this year, and I don't.
They're preparing for something, for letting us know something, I feel like. I don't know. That's a whole other conspiracy.
Oh my goodness. Or they're just saying that to distract us from what really is going on, which,
that's
again, another whole conspiracy. So to get back on track, I agree. I think with how experienced the pilot is, there's no way it could have been planets and ice crystals. I feel like he has flown for 29 years, and he was even a military pilot. It just doesn't add up that he would mistake something like that. And planets and ice crystals wouldn't show up on two different radars. So I don't feel like that would be the case. As far as the split image, I mean, I guess it does happen. I don't know if it would happen for 30 minutes. And the thing is, they actually saw lights. They saw two objects with lights, and the pilot saw this other larger object and was on the radar. So if it's just a split image, it wouldn't actually show up in real life. It's just a malfunction on the radar screen, not something that they could actually see. So that doesn't really make sense to me either. So I don't know if I'm going to go as far as it's aliens, but I will say it's probably a UFO, and maybe it's some other type of military, because remember when the FAA first interviewed, it seemed like they were more interested in why something was invading their airspace, and they were trying to figure out, almost seems like some other type of military has some type of technology that they may not know of, and they're trying to figure out what it was, what it looked like. So maybe it was that? I don't know. So guys, what are your thoughts? Were the lights in UFOs just a radar malfunction? Were they just a mixture of natural elements such as ice crystals and planets? Or was it really a curious UFO following them? Captain Trauchi's wife told him something that he will think about forever about that night. She stated, quote, "You saw something that you weren't meant to see," end quote. Thank you for listening to this episode. Go check out our website if you want to see our sources, pictures, and other information from this episode at curlyconspiracies.com. You can also follow us on Instagram and search for the handle Curly Conspiracies. This podcast is brought to you by Megwa Ren Productions. Brooke Sasser is a script writer, host, and researcher. Holly Lauerman is a script writer, host, and researcher. Chris Sasser Photography and Graphic Design, Round Table Audio Productions, and the theme music is composed by Victor Wayne Music Production in Invado Market. Thank you again, and join us on Theory Thursday next week.
Thanks again for listening to Scary Time by Indie Drop-In Network. Check out all of Indie Drop-In shows at indiedropin.com. If you would like your show featured, reach out to us at Indie Drop-In on all social media or go to indiedropin.com.